Thanks to everyone for coming and joining us tonight for our first session of Ask a DPE. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, I'm not using actual questions. These are questions that I used in past progress checks that I actually used them on flight tests because I can't share with you my questions. And I know Logan and Adam, because they're up very soon, are disappointed in that, but you can ask me all the kind of questions you want. I'm going to give you some examples and then we're going to go through a presentation with that. So I'm going to go ahead and you all can mute or unmute anytime you want to ask questions. I am going to expect some participation on this. So I'm going to be asking the questions and you're going to try to answer the questions, and I'm going to walk you through how to go about answering some of those questions. And they're all going to be scenario-based questions. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my presentation. And then I'm actually better first share the screen. All right, so I'm going to go to screen share. And I do apologize. You may hear the dog huffing and puffing in the background. He's more than 6 feet away, so he shouldn't be too loud. But the other morning he was right next to me and everybody could hear him. All right. So here we go. Once again, my first disclaimer is I'm not Evan. I'm not as technologically savvy as Evan. So this is not going to be as fancy as his presentation as Evan's are. But we're very blessed to have him and the work he does. And I will tell you that if you went through his Airspace presentation last week, some of the questions I'm going to be throwing out here tonight are going to definitely, if you paid attention to that, you'll be able to answer them. So here's our plan of action, and that is a play on the whole flight test thing, because we have to have a written plan of action. I'll be talking about that here in a little bit, but we're going to talk about what the process is. And tonight's main focus is on the oral exam and the ground portion. I prefer to call it the ground portion because there's the oral questioning continues throughout. But I'm going to talk about what we do in the pre-flight briefing and talk about what scenario questions are and why we have to ask them. Then we're going to get into the meat of it. I've got about 5 questions, or I think 5 scenarios and situations that we're going to talk, and we're going to kind of walk through how to attack a scenario question. My main goal for tonight is to just talk about when you get a scenario-based question, develop the critical thinking of how to answer it and how to come up with the answer. And so that's going to be a bulk of it. And then the rest of the evening is going to be answering your questions about the flight test. The plan for next week is to then attack the flight maneuvers, talk about common errors and how to avoid them, and get a little bit more heavily into the ACS. So when you come for the check ride, we first have to establish eligibility, and that's both for you and the airplane. So the things that we've got to look at are your certificates. You need to bring your pilot certificate and your medical certificate, and they need to be valid. And you need to have a valid photo ID. So an expired driver's license will not work. A medical that is no longer valid, whether it be first, second, or third. Now, technically, the medical level that you need for all of these flight tests is third. Even if it's a commercial, you still only need the third to obtain the certificate. So that's all we're looking for there. And of course, a pilot certificate it has to be it could be a student pilot certificate, it could be a private pilot certificate, or private pilot certificate with instrument rating, etc. So we first validate that. Now, one of the most important things is your names have to match, so on the pilot certificate, the medical certificate, the photo ID, and the knowledge test results all have to have the same name. Most importantly, the photo ID has to match the pilot certificate, and the test results have to match that. Now, what they do with the test results, they will actually now, as of the 13th of January, you have to have an IACRA account, and you have to have a FTN number to even schedule a knowledge test. And The reason they did that was to alleviate a mismatch problem. That a lot of times test results would come in with not the full correct name, would not match the pilot certificate. And when that happened, we ended up having to do a paper file, and it slowed up the processing process. And that it is definitely important to have these things correct. So one of the things we do before we put an applicant up for the course final progress check is the instructors verify all this information. They put together a red folder with all this documentation in it and send it to me to make sure we have multiple sets of eyes going through it to make sure we haven't missed anything there. The next thing we check is the test results. It used to be we had to have the raised seal on the test result, but as of the 13th of January, it no longer has to have that seal on it. The other thing that changed as of the 13th of January is when you take a test now, you will get the ACS test codes instead of the PLT codes. So when people have not taken the flight test yet, but maybe have taken the knowledge test, the codes identify the subject matter of the questions that were missed. And as a pilot examiner, I'm supposed to take those codes. And previously I had to decode the PLT code and convert it to an ACS code and come up with a question. Now I at least am able to use the ACS code to come directly to that. And I actually have an example of the test codes now. The old PLT codes were very vague and very, PLT 141 could be a large subject matter. Whereas here, the test codes are broken up: P for private, A for airplane, Area 3, Task B, item K4 is the one that's highlighted. And so what I do with that is then I go into the actual ACS, and I would go to section 3, and so I'm going to go ahead and scroll down there. So if I just look at the table of contents, section 3 is going to be airplane traffic patterns, communication, light gun signals, and I believe it was BK. So there is. All right, so there is 3B, and I think it was K4. I'm gonna have to go back and look. BK4. So that was use of automated weather and airport information. So I would have to go out of my question bank and pick a question that matches that and that tests that subject. So I can test to see that you have gained the knowledge. So this has actually made the prep time for an examiner to give an exam much faster. We don't have to go to 2 different documents to come up with which is the right question. And we'll talk a little bit about the plan of action later, but the plan of action, actually, we keep these codes that apply to that alongside of our questions, so we can quickly go to questions that would apply to that section. We'll go back to the eligibility. So, when we schedule the flight test, one of the things we ask for is the applicant's FTN number. Once we have the FTN number, we can go into IACRA. Your test codes and result sheet is in IACRA, and we can open it, see the codes, and start planning the test. So night before, a couple days before, we can actually start picking the questions we want to use with the applicant. The next thing we got to look at is your logbook and your qualifications, specifically depending on the check ride, whether it be private, instrument, or commercial. We're looking at the applicable parts of Part 61 to make sure that you meet those qualifications. For example, 3 hours of flight by reference to the instrument in the private. We have to search through your logbook and find that you meet those qualifications. You might have 3.4, you might have 3.1, as long as you have more than 3.0 or 3.0 or more, you're fine. It's if you come up and we find out it's 2.9, then we can't actually even begin the test. And I've had that happen with applicants that the instructor thought they were ready, but when we actually audited the logbook, they weren't. Happens more commonly at the commercial level because there's a lot of different requirements there. The private is pretty straightforward. The instrument is pretty straightforward. But it would be a non-starter, and I've had to send people home for that. Once again, that's part of the reason we use the red folder and we do the level of audits. The instructor prepares it, I audit it to make sure we haven't missed anything, and the check instructor, when they're going through the end of course, will also look at it. And so, by the time you're up with the examiner, it's already been looked at 3 times. The other somewhat complicated portion is the endorsements. Now, in your logbook, especially if you've got the Cessna kit logbook, all those endorsements are in the back of the book, and we literally just have to fill your name in and sign it. We've vetted all of them against AC Advisory Circular 6165 to make sure that the wording is correct. You'll notice some of your books may have some stickers in there in the back because some of the wording changed, and instead of reprinting books, King Schools just printed these stickers and covered the page with the sticker that has the proper wording on it until they get the new printed versions out. And so we make sure that the endorsements are correct. Now, those endorsements, once your instructor gives it to you, is valid for a period of 60 days. So once they sign the logbook, once they sign the IACRA application, you've got 60 days to complete the flight test. And so most of the time, they're not signing that until the flight test is scheduled, and it's a couple days out, so that calendar time won't usually run into a problem. So we first validate the applicant. The applicant's eligible, then we start validating the airplane. We actually look at the aircraft documents, airworthiness certificate, registration, operating limitations, weight and balance data sheet. Basically proving that the airplane has those documents on board, and that we are comfortable that they're valid documents. Once again, registration's the only one that can expire, so we're checking to make sure it's not expired. I have had that happen where the applicant didn't know that the registration was expired until we went out and looked at it. Logbook maintenance status and inspections. I'm looking for the same things you're looking for when you're trying to determine is an airplane airworthy. I'm looking for airworthiness or the annual inspection, the repeated static inspections, and so I'm looking at that checklist, making sure that the airplane has been properly maintained. I'm also looking in the logbooks for any real anomalies. If there is something that that just doesn't look right, because I've got to make sure that the airplane is safe for us to fly. And then I also will do a physical pre-flight of the airplane. Usually I wait for that until you're out pre-flight, and I'll follow you through, check some things on my own. I have gotten up to an airplane and said, no, we're not going to fly. That I've got an issue here. You guys need to get this addressed before we actually can go fly. You guys still see my screen with the check availability in there, eligibility in there?
Yes.
Yep. Yes.
Okay.
We can
Sometimes
see
when sometimes like it almost powered down because I was on the slide so long. Sometimes it kicks it off. So I'll ask that occasionally. Thank you. Okay. So basically, once we get through that, we determine you're eligible and the airplane's eligible. Then it's time to go into the pre-test briefing. This is a requirement by the FAA, and it's us outlining for you the rules of the ride. First of all, we're going to review the pilot bill of rights. If you're a student pilot, you've already signed recognizing that you understand the pilot bill of rights. You had to do that to get issued the student pilot certificate. You will sign this document again when you take the private pilot flight test, the instrument rating flight test, the commercial flight test, flight instructor flight test, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it is basically establishing that the FAA is telling you that anything on the application, they have the right to investigate it, and if you falsified it, et cetera, et cetera. I kind of think of it as like, the Miranda rights given to a person when they are arrested. You have the right to remain silent, blah 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 blah. It's what it is. They're basically indicating that, by being a pilot, by submitting this paperwork, that you're giving them the right to investigate you. And so that is a standard clause. And it actually comes from a situation where a sitting U.S. senator, who is also a pilot, flew to an airport in Texas, landed on a taxiway because the runway was closed, and couldn't understand why the FAA was investigating him. And so as a result, the Pilot Bill of Rights were born, so that they have to notify you that they're investigating you. And so the FAA said, fine, we'll just notify everybody that they're under investigation. And that is our political system at work. So, next, we're supposed to ask the applicant if they're familiar with the airman certification standards before we begin the test. And everybody says yes. But inevitably, when we go through it, I find out that they're not. Because I ask them, what's the tolerance on a steep turn altitude? And for the commercial, they always tell me 100, or they tell me or slow flight, sorry, I talk about slow flight. They tell me 100 feet, when in reality it's 50 feet. And so what we mean by, are you familiar with the airman certification standards, is, can you actually tell me what the standards are for each maneuver, and you understand what the expectations are for the test? And that's one of those things that if you are being tested, you want to know what your tolerances are, so that, for example, if it's 100 feet plus or minus, when you get 50 feet off an altitude, you know, I better correct, because I still have room to correct before I get out of standards. And so it is very important that the applicant understands all the information that's specified in the ACS as far as the expectation. And it is a very broad document, and it takes a while to get comfortable with it. But we do think that you need to maybe come up with abbreviated version, or a flashcard version, where you know the basics of each maneuver. So then I've got to notify you that the test is being conducted in accordance with the FAA-ACS. Basically means if it's not in there, I can't test you on it. I can't make things up. A new maneuver, for example, if in the commercial ACS there's a maneuver called the Chandelle, I cannot ask that of a private pilot because it's not in the private pilot ACS. And so only the things in the ACS are fair and eligible for me to ask of you on the test. Then I need to notify you that I'm using a plan of action to conduct the test, and the FAA has examiners create plans of action for every test, and literally it is a batch of questions associated with that oral exam that I use to guide me through the test, and then it is, which includes these scenarios, and then it also includes the flight scenario and the maneuvers that are going to be conducted in the flight. There are a couple places where we have options to do a maneuver. Not, for example, in the private, we can do one of the 3 ground reference maneuvers. So we can select to do turns about a point, or rectangular course, or rest turns across the road. And we just have that written in our plan of action, which one we're choosing that day, because it also kind of becomes a record of what we did on the flight test. And no, unfortunately, I cannot share that with you. That is a private document. The FAA would have a cow if I shared that with anyone. So don't ask, please. The other thing, note taking and oral questioning will continue throughout, and that's why I call it a ground session and then the flight session, because oral quizzing will continue throughout. So it's not just oral questioning on the ground and I don't ask any questions when we get in flight. I am responsible to ask questions generally related to the maneuver as we come in flight, to see if you can manage the workload, etc. The examiner cannot teach that we can't ask questions, we can't lead you in a maneuver, we can't have you do a maneuver a second time if you didn't do well on it the first time. We can, if, say, we got interrupted in the maneuver, which happens all the time in the practice area. All of a sudden, we don't like that traffic is getting a little closer to us than we originally thought it was going to be, and we say, okay, let's discontinue maneuver because of traffic, or I discontinue maneuver because of traffic or bird or whatever. I can ask you to do it again. So if I'm unsure if I've been able to see the entire maneuver, I can ask for you to repeat it, but you cannot ask me to have you repeat it. The other big thing, and this is huge in my opinion, is a very big part of the pre-brief. Perfection is not the standard. I know your instructor is expecting you to be perfect. You're expecting you to be perfect, but as a examiner, I'm expecting you to meet the ACS standards, and that's it. Some of you have probably viewed the video with Diego Alfonso, retired pilot examiner, retired FAA inspector, and he gets into this in a good detail about what's going on with, we're not expecting you to be perfect. He talks about managing your errors. He calls a flight test in 2 words, error management. And that really resonates with me, that nobody's perfect. Every flight we fly, we make a mistake here, there, wherever. You know, we get off altitude, we correct it. We miss a radio call, we get the next one. That happens. Pilots are all about managing those errors. And we need to, as we manage those errors, we need to realize that the examiner is expecting you to maybe even exceed ACS. If you read the front part of the ACS, it talks about the pilot that we're looking for consistent performance, not perfect performance. So this perfection is not the standard, actually comes right out of the ACS. And so what that really means is, okay, you may step outside of ACS. You may get more than 100 feet off your altitude. But if you catch it and you correct it in a timely manner, and it's not the type of thing that you get up to be 150 feet off and you fly there for 5 minutes till the point where I as the examiner have to say something, that is what we're talking about there. Is if you get off altitude, you find it, you correct it. You get off heading, you find it, you correct it. You miss one radio call, you get the next one. You know, those are what we mean by it's not going to be perfect. You, unfortunately, most of you are the personality profile of people that want to be pilots are perfectionists. We want to do it right the first time, and we get mad at ourselves if we don't. So then if we make a mistake, we get mad at ourselves, and then we get to the next maneuver and we make another mistake, we get even more mad at ourselves, and we make an even bigger mistake. Okay, now we've got a series of events that if we think about what we talk about when we talk about an accident, an aircraft accident or incidents, usually a series of events that lead up to the accident, not just one item. And so I look at it as it's a series of mistakes or a series of errors that lead up to the accident. If I focus on managing my errors, I will break the accident chain and prevent an accident. So when we talk about error management, we're talking perfection is not the standard. We absolutely positively are talking about real world flying, and that's all we want you to do on the flight test is manage the errors. You will not be error free, and that's ultimately the most important part of my little pre-oral brief when I give it. Okay, so now the final item that we have to do before we begin the test is we talk about the 3 possible outcomes. The first possible outcome is issuance of a temporary certificate. Temporary certificate is valid for 120 days from the date issue, which would be the flight test day. And it gives you the privileges of, in this case, say we're going from the student pilot to the private pilot, it gives you the private pilot privileges. Application, if it's processed through IACRA, the hard copy of the certificate usually comes within about 90 days. The good thing about anything that's been going on here recently with all the stay-at-home orders, Oklahoma City is not, those people are considered essential. They've not gone home. They're still processing certificates, so we should not see any backlog like we did when the government actually shut down last January, or a year ago January. There was some major delays with pilot certificates and temporaries actually expired. But temporary certificate is what happens a majority of the time. That 70, 75% of the time, most flight schools, 60, 70% of the time. Our school, it's more like 90% of the time. It is a majority of what happens. And you need to sit back and say, you know, if it happens that number of times, I should relax and just do what I'm good at and yeah, I should end up in the same place. Too many times applicants get nervous about the check ride. And that's one of the things that kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you get nervous, you make errors. And then you get nervous about the error you just made, you make more errors. And that leads to stepping out of standards to the point where a disapproval has to be issued. But like I say, if you go into Diego's videos, the psychology of the flight test, he talks about that. And that's one of the reasons why it's part of our little pre-flight test checklist, is spending time trying to understand the psychology of the test and what's going on in your head that day. Second possible outcome is a letter of discontinuance. A letter of discontinuance is issued if you get the ground portion done and the weather's bad, can't fly, the winds aren't favorable. We can issue a letter of discontinuance. In that scenario, the flight test is put on pause. We just reschedule the flight portion for a later date and time, hoping that the weather's going to be better. It also could be issued for a maintenance problem. If we go to the airplane, there's a mechanical problem, and there's no way to switch airplanes or get it fixed, then we can do a letter of discontinuance for that. The third possible reason for letter of discontinuance is one of us could be sick. Either the applicant or the examiner, that if anything happens that we can, if we're not feeling good, we don't want to take the flight test. The big thing about the letter of discontinuance is you want to set yourself up for success. You want to make sure, yeah, you got a good night's sleep the night before. Hey, that I'm safe checklist, you've had breakfast that morning. Yeah, there's some stress involved, but we're hoping to manage it. But if you're not feeling well, you've got a headache coming on because you didn't eat, you probably need to pay more attention to the human factors and the nutrition side of all that. But you still don't want to go do the test, and we don't want you to go do the test. We want you to pass the test. Yes, we got it on the schedule. Yes, we'd like to get it done, but hey, we'll get it back on the schedule as quick as possible. And set you up for success. Same thing goes with weather. I have seen numerous times where an applicant makes a decision because they want to get the test done, and they go up in weather conditions that are less than favorable. As an examiner, I can give a little bit of leeway in their performance, but not a significant amount of leeway in their performance. So if they're choosing to go up in a 10-knot crosswind, which is within the limits of the airplane, but if they have side drift on landing, that is out, and they drift to the left side or the right side of the center line, they're not aligned over the top of the center line, or the longitudinal axis of the airplane is not parallel to the center line, that would be a reason for disapproval, and not because anything more than they were probably in conditions that were stronger than they should have been. It's probably a little bit outside of their own limits, even though it was within the airplane's limits. And so once again, no harm, no foul. When you're making your go, no go decision, the examiner cannot be involved in that decision. You have to evaluate the weather, and you have to choose to go or not to go. An example, you can choose to go. We can go out to the airplane. You can pre-flight the airplane. We can taxi out to the runway. You can get your takeoff clearance and roll out on the runway, and there's a thunderstorm right off the runway that you've ignored, thinking, oh, we can get out of here. Okay, that would be a reason for disapproval, because you were clearly going into conditions you shouldn't have been going into, and you made a bad decision. But if you're sitting on in the run-up area, you look up at that cloud and say, that doesn't look good. I think we should go back in. You didn't accept the takeoff clearance. You made a good decision. Let's discontinue. So discontinue can occur even in flight. You can be up flying and say, yeah, this weather it looked good from the ground and looked good on the weather report. We're getting up here and the visibility is dropping. I can't keep clearance with those clouds. I need to discontinue this flight. Guess what happens at that point? You get a gold star saying, good, we got stuff done up to this point. I can now become a member of the flight crew, and we can get back. And if we had to, I could even file an IFR flight plan and come back in on our IFR flight plan. So it, once again, has to be initiated by the applicant. And I tell everybody, set yourself up for success. So third and final possible outcome is not the successful one. It's what we call a notice of disapproval. It would be issued if you're consistently exceeding the standards, And that's, of course, standards outlined in the ACS. If that happens, the examiner is supposed to notify you at that point. If it's steep turns, it's after the steep turn. Okay, that, you know, we take the flight controls and we tell you, okay, that was not within standards. And you obviously know that if you know the standards. Okay, I was off my altitude 200 feet. I get that, and so I got to issue notice disapproval. Then the examiner has the option to give you a chance to continue the test if they feel that you've been doing well enough up to that point. So first, the examiner has the option to give you the option. Then you have the choice to continue or not continue. If you say, no, I'm mentally drained, I want to go back in, no harm, no foul. Only that item that was not within standards has to be retested, and then any other items that were not attempted on the flight that required would have to be completed as well. If you choose to continue, anything you do after that point and that are within the standards will be given credit for on the following flight test. The other stipulation is if a notice of disapproval has been issued, you have 60 days from the date of the test to take the retest. Otherwise, you will have to do a complete retest. Same is true for the letter of discontinuance. You've got 60 days to complete it, or you have to, the things you've gotten credit for on the discontinuance, or the things you got credit on the disapproval, will have to be done in entirety. So it does give you a little bit of a clock ticking there, but I guarantee you every examiner tries not to have those hanging out, and will try to get those back in and complete it as quick as possible. All right, so that's kind of the pre-flight briefing. Then we generally roll into what the scenario is. So here is the excerpt straight out of the ACS that talks about, through the ground flight portion of practice, the FAA expects the evaluators to assess the applicant's mastery of the topic in accordance with the level of learning most appropriate for the specific task. The oral questioning will continue throughout the entire practice test. We already talked about that. For some topics, the evaluator will ask the applicant to describe or explain. For other items, the evaluator will ask the will assess the applicant's understanding by providing a scenario that requires the applicant to appropriately apply or correlate knowledge, experience, information to the circumstance of the given scenario. So that's where the scenario-based questioning comes from. And when we do the scenario, we build it around a overall bigger scenario. If you've been through the progress checks for cross country, or for end of course in the private, or the end of course in the instrument, there's an overall scenario given for those, and you work the problem of the flight test around those. So what I'm going to do from here, so this is kind of the briefing that everybody gets before they start the flight test, and then I talk about the actual scenario that they're going to have in the overall scenario, like VFR cross country to Tallahassee. We're going up for a football game, and we apply some general overall scenario, and then we try to keep our questions along that scenario throughout. Sometimes we'll throw some standalone scenarios in as well. So, okay, here's where microphones should be on, because I'm going to start asking for audience participation. I didn't hear a groan out there, did I?
Nope, no groan.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the question, and I'm going to kind of open it for some general discussion of can you, can't you, what should you do? You've been a private pilot for 5 years, but you haven't flown for the last 3 years. To get current, you decided to add on a multi-engine rating. 2 weeks after completing the training and passing the flight test, a friend asks you to take him for a ride. The only airplane you can find to rent is a Cessna 172. What do you have to do before taking your friend for a ride?
There's a day or night.
And instructors can't answer.
Haha, Bill.
Oh, back on here. Why are we here?
You're here so you can better understand the questions that are going to be asked of your customers and help you develop Good questions. It's not a competition like the trivia night, Bill. You can't win anything.
Brenda,
New pair of Daisy Dukes.
Hey, wait a minute. That's a question. Got to stay away from that. Okay. So, customers. Anybody want to try to walk through this one? Just or even come up with where should we start?
Hey, Ed, this is
Is
Aaron.
it day or night?
Is it day or night? Okay. It is day. And that is one of the things that even in these scenarios, not all the information may be given. You may have to ask a follow-up question like that. So that was very good.
So Ed, you need 3 takeoff and landings in the previous 90 days to carry passengers, and it applies to the class and category of the airplane that you're flying.
Right.
Okay, so the question is, because obviously when we're doing the training, taking a flight test, so at least 3 takeoffs and landings on a flight test. And that was just 2 weeks ago. So can we take the 172 for a flight?
I'm assuming that the person here in the scenario only flew a multi-engine plane that was not a
Correct.
Cessna 172, so he would not be current without doing 3 takeoff and landings in a Cessna 172 or a single engine.
Okay, yeah, because airplane multi-engine land does not count. And so Aaron is correct. That would be, so it basically says, what do you have to do before the flight? Well, here's the other thing that is not directly asked in there. To carry passengers, you mentioned the 3 takeoffs and landings in the last 90 days.
So
You've been a private pilot for
doesn't he
5
have
years.
to have
What else
an
do you,
instructor sign off?
for, say that again, please?
Don't if you're not current, don't you have to basically take like a mini recheck ride with someone and have them sign off and say that you're proficient?
Okay, school policies and rental fleet policies a lot of times put that in there. This is more from a strict FAA policy. So if you're when we're really looking at what we need to do, we're looking at both 6156 and 6157 and what the FAA rules are, which are quite lax compared to what they probably should be. That most operators do require an instructor getting involved in that scenario, but in all reality, the FAA does not. So, but what does 51 or 6156 also require of a pilot? If they became a private pilot 5 years ago, what do we have to do on a regular basis in addition to the 3 takeoffs and landings?
We would need
Biannual flight review.
Flight review. Okay, this mentions nothing of a flight review. So do they have to have a flight review to fly the 172?
No.
Why not?
Well, you've said they passed the practical test for the multi-engine rating, right?
Correct. Does that count as a flight review?
Under 6156D, I think it is. If they passed the practical test. Yep.
Yep. So, and that's one of those things that this scenario of a question probably is not a private pilot scenario of a question. This is more of a commercial pilot scenario of a question. And so it does change things up a little bit, but basically looking to see how well you know 6156 in the flight review requirement, the recency flight experience of 6157, and whether you would catch the category class. So there's a lot packed into this little question. So now I'm going to give you the exact same question, but from a slightly different perspective. You've been private pilot for 5 years, but you haven't flown in at least 3 years. To get current, you decided to get a tailwheel endorsement. 2 weeks after completing the training in a J3 Cub, which is a tailwheel airplane, and received the tailwheel endorsement, a friend asks you to take them for a ride. The only airplane you can find to rent is a 172. What do you have to do before taking your friend for that ride?
have the 3 takeoffs and 3 landings in the C-172?
Actually, a J3 Cub is an airplane single engine land, just like a 172 is an airplane single engine land. And the landings in the tailwheel airplane would count for the landings in the nose wheel airplane. The reverse is not true. If we did 3 takeoffs and landings in a 172 and then wanted to carry a passenger in J3 Cub, it would not count. And that's coming out of the 6157. So it is they are both the same category and class, but that's what's kind of is part of the scenario to see if you understand the difference between tailwheel and nose wheel. What other thing is missing from here that we were talking about in the last question?
Flight review.
Does the tailwheel endorsement count as a flight review? And the answer to that would be no, they're separate regulations. So there would also have to be in the logbook a flight review endorsement. So once again, it's when we're looking at these currency regulations and proficiency regulations, we're looking at the category class. One of the other common misconceptions of this reg is it says category and class and type if type required. And a lot of people say, I've got to do those takeoffs and landings in a Cessna 172 versus a Piper Warrior. Well, type isn't a term used for a large airplane over 12,500 pounds. A type of rating is required in a large aircraft, so or a jet or turbo jet aircraft. So in that instance, I could do 3 takeoffs and landings in, say, the Archer, and that would count for currency in the 172 because it's still same category and class. And so from there, understanding what that type means is, okay, a lot of people try to say, well, no, I've got to do it in a 172, but in all reality, that's not true. It just has the same category and class. We could also throw an airplane in there like a Bonanza, which is high performance as well as complex. If I did my landings in a complex airplane or a high performance airplane and then went to fly 172, it's still airplane single engine land, so it would still count. Okay, so but you saw we're just changing a little bit in that same question. Hang on a second, guys. Can you please take him outside with you, Jay? Just put his little harness on him. Yeah, he made his collar off. My dog doesn't understand why I keep talking to the computer, not him. So, and he's almost 15 years old, so he's kind of impatient. All right, so but just changing a little bit in the question, brought a completely different scenario, but still the same knowledge of the same 2 regulations. So now, those were the easy ones. No, oops, where am I going here? Just take him outside and close the door, please, EJ. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay, so now it's getting a little more complicated. You and a business partner have a need to go to Jacksonville today for a business meeting. It's 11:30 at 11:30 a.m. You're planning to fly up to save some time. You're running late due to I-4 traffic. We're back in the real world where there's traffic on I-4. You arrive at the airport at 10 a.m. During the pre-flight, you notice the placard on the left wing that normally would tell you how much usable fuel it is has faded and the sun is no longer legible. What do you do? Is that
Can't fly.
Can't fly? Okay, good. Why not?
It violates the O of
placards are
Aero by
fires.
not having all the placards.
Placards can't.
Correct. So
Yeah.
you still have a meeting. It's an important meeting. And how do you still accomplish the flight? What are some other options you have if that placard is faded?
Maybe look for the plane, another plane.
Okay, all the other planes are out flying. Great option, but don't have availability.
Uh,
What else?
Talk to maintenance to see if they can fix it, or if it's something that can be fixed quickly.
Okay, so it actually even doesn't require maintenance to solve this problem. Do you have to use a sticker that is manufactured by and provided by Cessna Aircraft Company, or can you make your own?
You can make your own and put it in per the manual.
Yep, it worded exactly the way it's worded in the manual. What section in the manual would I find that wording?
Where it describes all the placards that should be on the plane. I don't know what.
Section,
That is
hey,
a whole
Juan,
section.
section 2 limitations. So yes, we could literally use a label maker and we could word it the exact same way, stick it up on the wing. We could print it out and take packing tape so you could read through it and put it on the wing, and it would be legal to fly. So you would be able to get up to Jacksonville for your meeting. Once again, the other part about this question is, there's a lot leading up to a pretty simple question, other than we're trying to apply external pressure. That we're giving you a time frame of, it's 10 a.m. I got to be there by 11:30, and it's an hour flight. I am pushing it here. So that pushing it might lead somebody to making a bad decision and taking off without the placard on, because we all know the airplane's going to fly just fine. But the follow-up question is, if you decided to do that, is then you land in Jacksonville, and you're met by this kind gentleman from the FAA. He shows you his badge and he asks if he could look at your airplane. And then he looks at your airplane, finds this sticker faded, and who gets in trouble, you or the flight school?
That would be the public.
You do as pilot.
Pilot command. Okay, so and that's where this question can lead to other questions, and so realize the main scenario, depending on your answers, can go off in different directions. Don't hesitate to give the answers. Way too many instructors tell people to give the minimum amount of information so you don't dig yourself a hole. Give us everything you got. It will take you down a path, but if you've got what you need to know, it's no big deal. Okay, so now you're in Jacksonville. The meeting's over. During the pre-flight for the return trip, you discovered that the flaps will not extend. What do you do?
You don't take off yet. You don't fly yet.
Yeah.
Okay, good. We're not going to fly.
You'd want to make sure, I guess, first of all, whether they're required. You can check that.
Okay. All right.
91205.
Well, 91205 doesn't have anything about flaps in it, but I'm going to take you to the take you to the POH.
The KOEL.
Yep.
Yep, we're going to the KOEL. POH. Oh, look at that. It's on the KOL. Imagine I look up the KOL a lot. When we come here, flap motor, under flight controls, 11111, it's required.
Yep.
So can we go?
No, there's no.
Okay. Well, we got to get it fixed, but there's no mechanics available up there to fix it. Is there a way that we could bring it back to Orlando to get it fixed here?
Yeah, you could contact your local FSDO and get a special flight permit.
Okay. So you get a special flight permit. Not as simple as it sounds, because you also have to get a mechanic to inspect the airplane and sign off on the special flight permit that the airplane is safe to fly like that. So that is a little bit of a twist that a lot of people don't realize. But
how far away is Jacksonville? Because aren't you allowed to make a flight to get your plane somewhere where it can be maintained or go into maintenance?
If it was for a 100-hour, yes. If it was for an AD, maybe, depending on the way the AD is written. but this is just a simple inoperative equipment, kinds of operation equipment list says it's required. The airplane's grounded until it's fixed, or the special flight permit is also an option. So those would be, so don't try to apply something from one rule to another rule. Make sure it's in the appropriate category. So now when we talk about the special flight permit, okay, great. Let's say the meeting got over at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so it's going to be a daytime flight. Can your passenger come back with you once you have the special flight permit?
I don't think so.
I go with no unless they're a required crew member.
Yeah.
That would be correct. They're not a required crew member, so no, they can't. They are getting a rental car and driving back. The other stipulation is with them, unless it's otherwise specified in the special flight permit, you're gonna be day VFR conditions. Had a sales guy from Beechcraft, a demo pilot, said that they had a gear problem on a Bonanza on a demo flight, and he was out on the East Coast and had to fly the airplane back to Wichita on a special flight permit with the gear down the entire way. So he's going westbound into the wind in a Bonanza with the gear down, and he had to be VFR. So it was a multiple day trip as a result of that. But it is a way to say, once again, knowing the rules and applying them, and it was a perfectly safe operation. And so it was an example of how to use that. And that's where when we come up with these scenario-based questions, we're looking at knowledge that someone should have and seeing if they can use the knowledge, not just have it memorized, but actually pull it up and apply it to the situation. All right, 2 more rather large scenario questions. This one, we're on a VFR flight from Tallahassee to PIE, so that's St. Pete, Clearwater, via the CTY VOR, Cross City VOR, and we're at 7,500 feet MSL. At the point indicated on the map, which I'll show you in a minute, the low oil pressure annunciator illuminates. What do you do? So there's our route over the Cross City, and then from Cross City down to PIE, basically because the pilot didn't want to be out over open water, wanted to stay in gliding distance. And so here we are. That's where the oil pressure annunciator came on. What do you do?
Check your oil pressure gauge.
Check your oil pressure gauge. Thank you very much. So many people are immediately going into the emergency landing checklist, etc. But what PSI does the low oil pressure annunciator in the 172 come on at when the oil pressure goes below this level, PSI? Well, that's about 20 seconds of silence. So that person knows what I'm.
3 PSI, I guess.
Well, the 20 seconds was a hint.
It's 20 PSI.
20 PSI. Yeah.
Good. So it doesn't come on until the pressure drops below 20 PSI. So yes, checking your oil pressure indicator can give you a lot of information. What would normal PSI be if you looked at the indicator? How many PSI, if the engine was running normally, would you expect to see? About 80. About 80 PSI. So let's say you looked at the pressure indicator. It's in the green. You go to the second page of the engine status, and it says 80 PSI. What do? You got a low oil pressure annunciator saying it's below 20, but you have an oil pressure indicator saying it's fine. What do?
Are you allowed to clear it once to see if it comes back?
Clear what once?
The annunciator by using the soft keys.
All the soft key does is extinguish the audible.
Okay.
So you can't reset.
Grab the POH.
Okay. Where are you going to look at in POH?
Well, if we're getting mismatched readings there, I would next look at the oil temperature, see if my temperature is going up.
Okay, oil temperature is fine at this point.
Okay, so if the temperature's good, the engine's running steady, and my oil pressure gauge is showing a normal reading, then I can, for the time being, assume that maybe the separate sensor that powers the annunciator has failed, and continue to monitor all of those gauges and fly, but probably land as soon as practical versus as soon as possible.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back to the map for this one. So where would you say as soon as practical would be?
Get close into my monitor here.
Head to land.
It looks like, what is that, Crystal River there?
Yeah, Crystal River.
Yeah, that would probably be a good place to divert to.
And you can also get Dairy Queen.
Yeah.
You have to walk a little farther now. They took the gate away.
Yeah,
but that would be a good decision. And when you get to this point, it kind of comes down to about the only decision that would not be necessarily the best would be continuing on into PIE. Just because of all the population you're going to be going over at a lower altitude, because you're going to have to be getting down below the Bravo shelves, etc. Right now you're 7,500. You turn towards Crystal River, you probably could almost glide there. But like I say, Brooksville would be another option. Wouldn't be a bad option. Inverness wouldn't be a bad option. Like I say, but continue on to PIE might be the one that would not. Now I want to go back to the POH because you were heading in a you were heading in a good direction there. So knowledge of the system is a very important item, and so we knew that there are two pressure switches. One that is associated with the pressure annunciator, the other which is associated with the pressure indicator, and that came out of the POH. And so I'm trying to, once again, because you need to know where information comes from. So if you ask, which does get asked, is well, how do you know there are two pressure indicators, pressure sensors? And so oil pressure. So right here on this page, second paragraph under oil pressure, the oil pressure transducer connected to the engine forward oil port provides a signal to the engine display that is processed and shown as oil pressure. A separate low oil pressure switch causes an oil pressure annunciator on the PFD when the oil pressure is between 0 and 20 psi. A red X through the oil pressure indicator means that the indicating system is inoperative. So the information is readily there. It goes on and talks about oil temperatures and what normal oil temperatures are. Never really talks about normal oil pressure. It just gives you the range, green band between 50 and 90. But normally if you check it, it'll be running around 80. And so now this level of a question would be very high-end private, but so may or may not be in other words, if somebody's really sharp on the private, yeah, we would definitely expect to see this. It would definitely be a commercial level question, knowing the airplane systems that well. So another thing that I want to talk about while we're on this subject, because it is a soapbox I like to get on. There was a accident a number of years ago, probably about 15 years ago. It was a flying club airplane out of Orlando Executive. They were here on the west shore of Lake Apopka, right about here, and they noticed they had no oil pressure, but they looked over at their oil temperature and it was normal. So they decided to head back towards Executive. They started to climb and decided, oh no, we got Bravo airspace there. So they were going to go up to 2,500, then decided, go back down to 1500, and they continued along this route. Winds that day were kind of out of the southeast, so they're going into a headwind, and they got to right about here when the engine failed. Not within gliding distance of the airport. They tried to land on Dubs Dreg Golf Course just off of I-4 and Lee Road over there. And unfortunately, they were landing with a tailwind because they turned back this way to the airport and just took whatever they, or to the golf course, took whatever they could see. Yeah, they could have dropped it in that lake over there, but they didn't think about that. The instructor ended up dying in the crash. The student lived, and that's why we know so much about it. It actually was caught on TV by one of the helicopter news stations. The problem was the oil line broke. All the oil was pumped out of the airplane, but the oil temperature probe is right next to the oil cooler, and it's screwed into the, you know, basically the block or the aluminum casing of the engine. It doesn't read a high temperature until the engine's about to seize. So if you see a high oil temperature, that means the seizure or the engine failure is imminent, and it is a land immediately scenario. But in this scenario,
hello.
Thank you.
What's up?
The oil pressure indication.
Yep, still going. Yep.
Was actually accurate, and they could have landed here at
I
Carter.
would say it's going to be 5:30 or 6.
And or they could have come over here.
Well, yeah, it's already been an hour, but it's hard to tell for sure. They're going over a lot of testing stuff that's important to know.
So that's a scenario where knowing your system and knowing that oil temperature is not an absolute indicator of oil pressure; it's an eventual indication of oil pressure. And so that'd be one of those things that as you think about it, you're right to look at it. It is an indicator. It's going to be an indicator that it's almost immediate. Do you have my PowerPoint back up? I think I might have just
Yes.
do that.
Yeah, it's back.
So Ed, are you there? Hey, Ed.
Yeah.
Ed, I have a question. There's nowhere in the POH will troubleshoot that oil pressure at all? I mean, just
there is.
Yeah,
there is
I'm gonna kick back into broadcasting here in a second. I just have to reset something.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go back in and
it's
I'm
335.
Section 3, page 35.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so everybody see my ForeFlight now?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, so 3.
$345.
35.
35.
That's correct.
So it's expanded procedures. There isn't anything with a low oil pressure annunciator in the normal portion or the emergency portion.
I'll check the oil pressure indicator.
The POH checklist, which of course is always available to you in the airplane, does have more detail than our abbreviated checklist. But it doesn't look like, other than the abbreviated or the amplified procedures, we are going to have anything about low oil pressure. Yeah, so 3-35 is the only source for that as far as what to do. And let's go back and read that. All right. Evidently, we got cut off there. Let's see who else comes back on. Hi, Tony.
How you doing, Ed? We're back.
All right. All right, we got a good few back here. Cool. All right, so let me go back to my shared screen and get back into start that. So now we're back into the scenario. What I was asking right as we're getting cut off there. So let's say, you know, the right follow-up question was asked, you know, the oil pressure stage comes on, what do you do? What's the oil pressure indicator say? Well, let's say the oil pressure indicator showed it was below the green, it was below 20, maybe 15 PSI. You're at 7,500 feet where the red X is. What do you do? How does that change the scenario and your actions?
Well, you're gonna want to land as soon as possible, safely.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, how far you are, if you get close to the shoulder, a nice room.
What heading would you fly?
Well, generally east, it's gonna be based on the winds.
Okay. So yeah, shortest distance between 2 points, shooting for some of those little islands, and at least the shallower waters directly east. You're at 7,500 feet, and this, I don't, you know, obviously it's not ForeFlight where I can drop my fingers on it, but we can kind of determine how far we are from the shore. Each one of these rings is about 5 miles. You're probably 7 to 8 miles from the shore. Could you glide that far from 7,500 feet? And how would you find out if you could?
Like
Go back to POH.
Yeah, there's a glide distance chart.
Yeah, page 94.
The glide ratio is roughly 7 to 1. 172.
So if we go in here at 7,500 feet, oops, not a very straight line, about 10 miles. So we should be able to make the land at least. And that's where the pilot planned their flight accordingly. This is actually a real scenario that a customer had on a rental flight. And he actually texted me in flight, I've got a low oil pressure denunciator. He ended up choosing to go to Brooksville and getting it looked at. But yeah, I got a text in flight from somebody saying, this is what's going on. What should I do? So I was able to help him on that one. But that would be how you'd figure. And then, you know, a rough number, 1,000 feet up, 1 mile. Even that would say 7.5 miles, which would be less than what the real glide path would be. But you know, it's a good rule of thumb. All right, so back here now, the final scenario. This one's a little bit more involved. This would probably be a commercial level airspace type question, and so. You own a Cessna 172, you keep it hangared at KFZG. Your annual expires on April 30th of 2020. You have the annual schedule with mechanics starting on May 1st because you want to get that 13th month out of it next year. So you don't have to do it until the end of May. So you extend your annual. You were planning on taking the airplane to KEZM tomorrow, 4:30, but the forecast weather for tomorrow is LIFR over the entire area. Current conditions are as follows, and our forecast to stay the same until 2300 Zulu today. So over Fitzgerald, 280 at 3 knots, 2 miles visibility, broken 900, temperature dew point and altimeter. So these are METARs, and it's going to make more sense when you actually see where these airports are, but you can see that pretty much everywhere we've got about 2 miles visibility and clouds between 800 and 1100. On the cloud levels. What are your options to get the airplane to EZM for the annual? So here's the overall picture, and as we scroll in a little bit, I'm going to use my little pen here. You can see that we have Cordell, which is CKF here. We have Tifton, Georgia here. This is Fitzgerald, where you're based. This is North Georgia, or what is it called? Heart of Georgia Regional, EZM. We've got Hazelhurst here. That's another place that we have an AWAS from. This right up here is Warner Robins Air Force Base, and that's where you're getting your TAF out of. And then this is Cochrane, and it has weather information too. So now the next slide, a little bit closer in, you can still see those same airports. You got CKF, you got CKF, you've got Tifton, which is TMA right down there, and then you have.
Can I go ahead and answer?
Sure.
Don't procrastinate. Wait till tomorrow to take the plane. Take it today.
So
assuming you're appropriately rated.
You're a private pilot.
Oh, sorry.
So the question is, you're not instrument rated. The airplane is not instrument equipped. We'll do it any way we want. What are the takeoff minimums at FZG? VFR takeoff minimums.
One mile visibility clouds.
Well, yeah, takeoff minimums. That's more of what are the minimums inside of which airspace?
Yeah, that would be the climate. The 3 miles.
Well, the first thing you got to ask yourself anytime you're answering an airspace scenario is, what type of airspace am I in? So when you're sitting on the ground at Fitzgerald, what type of airspace exists at the ground there?
Golf.
I couldn't hear that. They were cutting out there.
Golf.
Okay, so we have Gulf Airport. What's the visibility requirement for takeoff in Gulf airspace?
1 mile. Clouds.
At what altitude does Gulf end over Fitzgerald? 700 feet. Okay. What about going up into EZM? And what about the route in between there and EZM? What kind of airspace are you going to be in there?
The echo airspace.
Can you go into echo airspace? Let's say I'm sitting right where that red line is I just drew. What airspace exists where that red line is?
Gulf up 1200, and Echo 1200, 17,900.
Okay. So we've got both Echo and Golf.
Yep.
Okay. What about up at EZM? What kind of airspace are you dealing with there?
You've got the ground.
You've got what at the ground?
Delta.
Okay. So what are your weather minimums for coming in and landing in Delta?
That would be the P1.
Okay. So the question comes, can you get the airplane with these weather conditions you see on the left from Fitzgerald to EZM today? Because it's a lot better, it's a little bit better today than tomorrow.
No.
So you cannot do a VFR flight between FZG and EZM.
Right. You can Gulf airspace all the way until you get to M airspace. But you can't actually airspace with the conditions.
Well, let's look at that. Remember, when we're asking these questions, you first have to answer them via technically correct via the regulations. So taking off of FZJ, can we do that and still stay VFR? As long as we stay in what type of airspace?
All airspace.
Okay. So as we go along the route, can we stay in Gulf airspace all the way up until just before getting to EZM?
Yes.
Okay. So how do we get into a Delta airport if the weather conditions are below VFR?
With a special VFR.
With a special VFR. Okay. So we're kind of working out so far that we can do this. Now, notice it's not the would we do this, it's the can we do this. I hope if I ask the question, would you do this, everyone would yell no. There's no reason for it because we can get a special flight permit on the 5th of May and fly it up there to the mechanic. Realize there's a lot of different answers to this question. So first, technically correct, we could, this is how we would do it. Now, my other question, the follow-up question, and this is the one that usually causes the most headaches. So where I drew the red line, what is the maximum MSL altitude that I can be at along that route and still be VFR with the weather conditions given on the right or on the left? Maximum MSL altitude.
MSL altitude, zoom it in a little.
You see, that's the thing. They need to ask me to zoom it in, Maggie, so they can see details that they need to answer the question. So I'm going to back it out. When we're over here, oops, get rid of my marker. When we're looking at the weather at these two locations, CKF and AZE, what's the cloud base? These two right here.
Broken, overcast.
No, CKF and AZE. Here's CKF and here's AZE.
Right.
Overcast.
At what altitude?
1100 AGL.
1100 AGL. So what are the cloud bases MSL?
Could you zoom in? Yeah, one of those. 1355.
Okay, so the clouds are at 1355 MSL. Where is Class E airspace where on our flight path where the red line is? What is our MSL altitude of E airspace there?
1200.
MSL.
Wait.
About 1400.
About 1400. So what would be a comfortable MSL altitude to still be legally VFR in Class Gulf airspace there?
Well, you would have to. About 1,100 MSL.
1,100. Okay, I'll take that one. That gives us, we can be even higher than that because we just have to maintain clear of the clouds, and they're about 1,300 feet. So I could be at 11, I could be at even at 1,200. As we go closer, you can also look here, we've got some obstacles to deal with. At 1,100, you're 500 feet above those obstacles. So that's a really good answer. So this level of detail, the big issue and the reason that this question comes up actually has to do with, does the applicant understand that this number is an AGL number and that their 1,200 number for Class E is an AGL number? And I heard somebody when we were asking the question, some people said 1,200, somebody said 1,200 feet AGL. Whenever you're talking about an altitude for airspace or when flying, you need to give it in whether it's an AGL number or an MSL number. So 1,200 for the AGL. That would be a correct answer there. When we're looking at field elevation, 203 feet here at Tefler, MSL, that's an MSL altitude, so that we know we're not comparing unlike terms. Because if I said I have to be below 1,200 feet and it was a AGL number, and you're thinking the clouds are 1,100 feet and that's an AGL number, you would have said, well, I need to be down at 1,000 feet or 900 feet. And then you run into some obstacle clearance issues there. And so this question is really getting into both understanding weather reports, understanding airspace, understanding Class G airspace rules, understanding Class Delta airspace rules, understanding special VFR privileges. We never even touched on the MOA there, what the altitude of the MOA is. But you can see in this one little scenario, there's a bunch of stuff coming at you. That's why I say it's not common as a private pilot. It's more common to get this detailed about a commercial level. But here's the thing. We fly in Florida. What's the difference between AGL and MSL here?
Not very much.
Almost negligible. You know, you go out, airports, 113, you go to the coastline, the airports are 40, 50, 25. It becomes negligible, and you get so used to them being almost the same term. Then, we give you a question like this where they're just a little bit different. And a lot of times I have to remind people, think about Denver, Colorado. If the weather forecast that says overcast at 1,100, if that was an MSL, they would be subterranean because Denver is 5,000 feet above sea level. And that's usually where people click in. That's why you always hear say, well, how would this scenario play in Denver, Colorado? It's because of the elevation that we don't deal with in Florida. And so you can a lot of times end up getting confused when you go through these questions. And that's why I pulled this one in Georgia, because they got a little bit more elevation, not a grand amount of elevation, but a little bit more. And so that's why I brought that one in. Okay. It's time to turn the tables and let you ask questions. We've got as much time as you like, probably about 30 minutes. Now, what I've done, like I say, I've just given you some examples of scenario-based questions, give you some ideas. Remember, with airspace questions, always ask yourself, what airspace am I in? Then remind yourself of the rules for that airspace, and then start answering the question. You never have to rush to answer the question. It's always going to be done at your pace. And sometimes if you get stuck on something, we'll cycle back to it, let you go work on, answer questions about something else, come back to it. Because sometimes you get a mental block in it. You can't see the forest for the trees. Okay, so time for your questions. What do you want to know about and I have been very much VFR oriented, but I can definitely answer IF oriented questions too. What would you like to know about the flight costs?
Hey Ed, this is Aaron.
Hey Ed, this is Aaron. Hey Aaron.
I just want to clarify earlier. I think you said something in giving responses. I'm waiting for the echo to go away. So I can talk. To give you everything that you know in the response versus the kind of contrary opinion that's out there in places that says answer the bare minimum. And was that what you said and what you would prefer? Okay, just making sure I heard that right.
Yes. Got dark while I had that one. Yes. Because what we will do is we'll cut you off when you give us too much. We'll say, that's enough. Let's move on to the next subject.
Okay.
I prefer that. I know other examiners do as well. We'll tell you when you're talking too much. Give it to us, throw it out there. We might pick up on a couple things to ask some follow-up questions on, but if you've got the base knowledge, just give it to us so we can move on to something else. We don't want to give a 3-hour oral. We don't want to give a 2-hour oral if we don't have to. Sometimes it's hard to get it in under 2 hours because there's just so many questions subjects that we have to touch upon. And if we see that there's clear understanding at that level and correlation at that level on that subject, we're going to move on. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it. And so that's why I say, don't hold back, just give it to us. And that makes it easier on the examiner.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
The level of oral examination on the practical test, would it be comparable to what we saw in the final progress check? Or
yes, absolutely. They're both based on the same ACS. I will tell you in the progress check world what I would do I'm specifically not doing any end of course progress checks because I believe it's a conflict of interest in doing the flight test. Even though the FAA has no problem with it, they just say I can't be the recommending instructor. I can't give them the last 3 hours of flight instruction and sign you off for the flight test. But yes, the end of course orals that I would give, I would always book 4 hours because I know it was going to take it. I would leave no stone unturned. We'd touch on every subject matter and we would go in depth on every one. So most of the time when someone comes up to the FAA exam, they'll be like, well, that was easy. That's the way it's supposed to be. If the school does their job right, the oral, the flight should be easy. And that we're in a weird situation where I'm also the examiner. And so, I'm coming in and giving the test. I already know what I'm going to see for the most part. And as long as you are relaxed and you show me that base knowledge, we're going to be moving through it pretty quick. Because I know what you've been through. That's true with other schools. There's schools I go to and I know exactly what I'm going to see. And I know the depth that they're going to go to. And unless somebody just gets nervous, they're probably going to do just fine. There are other schools that it's 50-50. Did the instructor take the time to prepare them? Did the applicant take the time to do the studying? Because the school didn't enforce it. They don't have any progress checks. They have no check and balance on it. The instructor thinks they're ready. They send them up, give it a try, figure they'll go back and they'll pass on the second attempt. That actually is how some schools operate. And you'll get, as an examiner, you get to know who's going to have a better prepared candidate than another. And yeah, occasionally you're going to get somebody that doesn't do well at any school. That even if the school's doing a great job, it's still individual based. But what you would experience on most exams would be like, oh, okay, that's easy. We are preparing you at our school to not just pass the test, but be a good, safe, competent pilot. And I'll tell you, my guideline to the staff, both check staff as well as flight instructor staff, we want to get you to a level where we'd be comfortable putting our family in the airplane with you and send you to Ocala for a burger. And if you can do that, you can pass any flight test. And so yeah, we go in depth, and what you'll see won't be as long as you're relaxed. If you're holding back on me and you're not giving me questions, I got to dig and I got to come at it from 5 different angles. Yeah, it's going to take longer. But the expectation is straight ACS. Whereas in a progress check, we're looking for standardization procedures. We're looking for a lot of stuff just to make sure you're going to do it the way we want you to do it when you go out there for the real world. Because those habits that we build are what makes the difference in a safe pilot and a not safe pilot. What else?
Hey, I have a question, Ed.
Yeah.
For instrument
Notice these
candidates,
two guys are up for flight tests, so they're asking all the questions. Yeah.
Are there maybe 2 or 3 areas where you seem to be finding perhaps that instrument candidates could have a little more knowledge to your liking that maybe aren't covered as much in the course?
Weather theory, icing, how it forms, icing equipment. If you go through the advisory circular on icing, and I can't think of it off my 9147, I think. You've got most of that, but that's usually when it comes time one of the more challenging areas for people across the board. Instrument currency, determining how to be instrument current, that's usually pretty easy. The other area is when we get into cross-country planning, as far as fuel planning, as far as alternate planning, and as far as a loss comm scenario and how that all relates. How to get to your destination airport without GPS in a loss comm scenario. That's usually a weak area. Generally approach procedures are solid that I don't usually see, because that's where they spend most of their time. Holding procedures are usually solid. It's just those 2 areas are probably the most common weak areas.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can I ask a specific question from I purchased the oral exam, private exam.
The blue book? Yeah.
Yeah, and me and Bennett discussed it the other day, and then I also discussed it again with Maggie today, but and Maggie did explain it more, but the more I kept looking at the question, the more I got confused, I guess. Is there any way I would be able to share my screen with you really fast? Because I screenshotted the question. And
she's tech savvy. I like it. Okay. You're flying in a single engine, high performance, complex airplane. You have a private pilot certificate, airplane single engine. You do not have high performance or complex endorsements. Your friend who's endorsed is acting as pilot command. Can you log pilot command time for the time you're actually sole manipulator controls? And it's going to tell you, yes, you can, because you're rated for airplane single engine landing, your sole manipulator controls. It's more likely what it's saying down there. What's your question about it?
I guess I just didn't really understand.
We had a conversation today about the difference between acting as PIC and logging PIC.
Yeah, when you go to 6151, it talks about the logging of pilot command time. So let's put this. So when you get your private pilot license, you're going to be rated as a airplane single engine land pilot. but you're going to start doing instrument training. And in the instrument training, you're going to put the hood on and you're going to fly maybe across country because that's part of what you're doing in the instrument is flying cross countries. The question is, can that count as pilot command cross country? And because the reg said, as long as you're sole manipulator controls and rated for the airplane, you can log pilot command time. The flight instructor is still in charge. The flight instructor is still pilot command because they are pilot command. So it's the difference of acting as pilot command, which is the person who's really in charge, and the pilot flying the airplane is getting pilot command time in their logbook because they're actually manipulating controls. Does that differentiation make any more sense?
Yeah, but what if the friend wasn't a flight instructor, I guess?
Okay, true. They're still acting as pilot command because they're rated for the aircraft. If you put the hood on, they can also act as a safety pilot. And that's where this question really does run into issues of why would you be manipulating the controls? About the only scenario that really would work is you put the hood on in this complex airplane, manipulated the controls under the hood. They acted as safety pilot. They are in that instance both safety pilot and pilot command, and you're just because they are the pilot command, and you're just logging the pilot command time because you're flying the controls with the hood on. That's really the only scenario where this works, and that's where it comes up as I look at the foundation of it as well. Technically, they're correct, but when would that happen when it's not a flight instructor sitting next to you? And that'd be about the only way it would be legit for that person to not be an instructor, but still be the pilot command.
Or if they passed out.
So I have a follow-up.
Somebody mute Bill.
I have a follow-up question on this. So let's say that this person put all this piloting command time in their logbook because they were flying around with their friend. As an examiner, if they rolled into a check ride with, say, 30 hours in a Piper Arrow and no complex endorsement, and those 30 hours were counted towards, like, you know, cross-country time or something, could they or could they not do that? Like, what part of that is loggable?
The only issue that they could do there would be if it was as a simulated instrument where they were under the hood. It would then count. Because that's the only way both people in the airplane can be logging pilot command time, is if one's under the hood and one's not. And then the one that's safety pilot can only log the person under the hood can only log the time they're under the hood. So there's got to be a reduction of takeoff and landing time. So that would be the only place that you would see it and it would actually count.
And they both couldn't log the cross country too, right? Because doesn't only the person doing the takeoff and landing for cross country, correct?
No, the cross country, when it comes to the pilot command cross country requirement is land at an airport more than 50 nautical miles from their original departure point. So the person under the hood would not be logging cross country time in that scenario because they're not landing at the destination unless they were logging it for ATP, which then the requirement is only flying to a point more than 50 miles from your departure. It doesn't say anything about a landing. So that's where it gets really great. And like I say, I'm definitely don't think that when it gets that complicated, yeah, the pre-qualifications eligibility time takes a long time, and yeah, it's not clean at all.
So when I was talking to Sydney about this during tutoring, and I said this was a really terrible question for a private pilot exam. That was correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This one, you know, what they're really asking here is, do you understand that you can't act as pilot command because you don't have the endorsement, but you can log pilot command because it's airplane single engine land. So it's really a question of, is it same category class? And what it really is leading you to is trying to sucker you towards that. What we talked about earlier is that it's not an airplane that requires a type rating, but some people confuse that when they read the reg.
So really, like you said, it would only be, you could only do that if you were under the hood.
Correct. And it would be, that would be the only place where it would actually work.
Okay.
All right. Other questions? Or actually, did I get that to your satisfaction, Sydney?
Yeah, I just don't think I really understood the question correct. And when it said like your friend, I didn't really assume that was
Yeah.
like,
Well, and that's where we spend a lot of time trying to come up with good questions, and sometimes we come up with bad questions. We ask it sounds good when we write it, then we ask him, we're like, I didn't think this one through. And so I've had to, and that's why when you talk to any examiners, our plans of action change all the time. We come up with new questions, we insert them, we try them a couple times to realize, hey, that really didn't get worded right, let me change this, and we modify them over time, or sometimes we just throw them out because they're just not legit.
are you still on, like, when you're in the oral ground portion of the test, are you allowed to ask the examiner to like reword something? Or
Yes, absolutely. Communication is imperfect. If you don't understand, because I'm not wording it the way you're used to hearing it, you can ask me to can you say that again? I'm not sure I understood what the question was, and I'll try to adjust the wording to make what the real question is more clear. Verbal communication is the worst, and so yeah, absolutely. You can ask us to restate, and we'll modify and help you understand what the question is. Can't expect to answer it until you know what the question is.
okay.
All right. Anybody else?
I'll
Yeah.
kind of echo a question asked about the IFR test. What is typically the weakest spot you see in private pilot applicants when it comes to the practical test?
Weather theory. At some schools, I'm known as the weather examiner, and Evan laughs at that because I do not go near as in depth as he does. So there's some schools that call me the weather guy, but it is an area that's just overall weak. That is true at every level. As far as on the ground portions, the systems knowledge is usually another area that people stumble on, and airspace. And like I said, the airspace question I used today was pretty high end. That it's not going to be that complicated, but it's not going to be the airspace you're used to flying in. And so that's why we try to come up with differing scenarios so that we are taking you into something you're not used to, and see if you can identify. Special use airspace especially. So that those are on the ground portion. The flight portions, which is something we're going to talk about in next week's scenario. We do hands down the landings, specifically the short field landing is a high percentage item because of the having to land within the 200 feet. And flight maneuver wise, it's sometimes the steep turn will be probably the most challenging. Usually the cross country departure and diversion are pretty straightforward. And the emergency procedure, because if somebody doesn't, if they pick a good field but then don't make it, those are probably the three flight areas that I see the most issues in.
Okay.
I'm flying around. Anybody else with any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Bill wanted me to ask why the TFR is still active over Disney, even though there's no one at Disney.
Hey, Bill, I got an assignment for you tomorrow. Can you find that out for me?
I'd answer, but I'm muted.
Government moves slow.
Bill, you got to understand, Bill's always got to make a comment. He can't help himself, and we love him for it.
That's why they make duct tape.
That's coming from, that'll work. Okay, so next up, we've got Evan doing a seminar on weather theory on Thursday night, 7 p.m. Highly recommend it. Next week, we have, and of course, we have our tutoring sessions 1 to 3 every day. And then next week, I'm doing part 2 of the Ask the DP on Tuesday night, 7 p.m. And I'm going to be addressing the practical test, and I'm going to talk about the private, the instrument, and the commercial. Give you some, kind of like what I was talking about there, common errors and why something is a common error in a maneuver and where we usually see the problem that is related to it, like landings and aim points, touchdown points, that type of thing. And then we'll walk through some of the ACS and what that really means in the ACS as far as those standards. And then, of course, open it up like tonight for some more general questions. It can even be if you forgot to ask something this week on something you want to know about the oral, please do it. Nothing that I discussed tonight is private or privileged. That it's all designed to help you understand what is coming when it comes to the test. It's the unknown that makes people nervous, and I want them not to come in nervous. I know that's reality. Is I can't change your personality, and that some of us get more nervous at these things than others. I am that way too. I have always been the type of person that gets check-itis. Even when I did my ATP in 4 years ago, Keith gave me such a hard time because I was making sure I was studying everything. He's like, you got this. What are you even studying for? And he just laughed at me because I got very uptight about it, and because I'm a perfectionist and I want to do it perfectly the first time, and so I know where you come from, and I believe it's my job as an examiner to create an environment where you come in and can relax and show me the real you. I tell people, I tell jokes, usually bad jokes. I call them dad jokes. Some people that have flown with me will tell you that I will threaten to tickle you if you get too tense on me. And we really don't want to have me tickling you, so don't get tense on me. But I just want you to realize that it's no different than a flight with your instructor, or a flight by yourself, or a flight with one of the check instructors. That if you know your stuff, you know your stuff. You can do your stuff, you can do it. And yeah, you're going to make mistakes, but as long as you find them and correct them, we're going to be fine. All right. Well, once again, thank you. We coming in 10 minutes under the wire, and I appreciate everybody hanging there as long as you did. I think we had a great group of people, some great questions, and hell of a lot of people on there too. I have to tell Evan that I beat his numbers from last week. So there's competition. All right. Any other
Thanks
questions
a lot,
before we sign
Ed.
off?
Thank you, guys.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Will there be a part 2? Will there be a part 2?
Part 2 is next Tuesday night.
Yes. Okay.
I was talking about that a minute ago. Were you not listening again, man?
No, I was not.
Oh, called out.
I have 2 Zoom meetings going on right now. I'm playing.
Is that why there was a glass of wine in your hand?
Don't judge me. All right.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Take care.
Thanks, Ed.
See ya.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Good night.